Hey guys, it's Brie and Emily. We just wanted to give you a disclaimer before we dive into our episode. We don't claim to know everything, never have and never will.
We want to use this space as a platform for open discussion, and sometimes that means we might be wrong. Know that our intent is not to offend, but to learn.
And with that, let's dig into today's episode.
Mixed Messages is a podcast by Brie Graham and Emily Madigan, two mixed women trying to navigate the complexities of living between multiple communities in these divided times.
On today's episode, we're talking to Alyssa Gomez and Lillian Castillo of the Cafe Con Leche podcast about what it means to be Latinx in a conversation about being mixed. I would like to give a content and trigger warning for this episode. We do mention rape, so please guard your hearts.
Hello, ladies.
What up, ladies?
Hello.
Hey.
Hello, mis reinas, my queens. Hello.
Queens on queens on queens.
So why don't you introduce yourselves? Lillian, do you want to go first?
Sure. My name is Lillian Castillo. I am a Puerto Rican woman living in Chicago. I have had the pleasure of meeting these wonderful, amazing, talented ladies over the last couple of years, and I am better for it. I am an actor, singer, sometimes strong mover. And Alyssa and I have a podcast called Cafe Con Leche, which is a podcast where we started it at the beginning of quarantine. And so the goal then was to unite the Latina family, the web of Latina family that is created by the show In the Heights. And that continues to be our goal, but it is morphed with everything going on around us. It has morphed to include our feelings and thoughts and our guests' feelings and thoughts about the Black Lives Matter movement and how we can support it / how it is also for us as Latina people. So it's really grown and changed in a really beautiful way. And I'm going to stop talking so that Alyssa can introduce herself.
I am Alyssa Gomez. I'm a Bronx-born Puerto Rican, Nuyorican. I am an actor, singer, director, and you can add whatever titles you want underneath that because I don't know how to not stay busy.
Super hustler.
I'm a hustler. Yeah, I am the other half of Cafe Con Leche with Lillian. It's been a really amazing journey to start. We started it, like she said, during a production of the show In the Heights, and it's just grown and taken on its own life, which is really cool. And it's really empowering to be able to speak to powerful women, just powerful BIPOC people, and just get our voices out there and try and make change together. So.
I'm so happy to have you guys here. For everyone listening, I was blessed to be able to do In the Heights with both Lillian and Alyssa for a year.
Pretty much.
A year and
almost 8 or 9 months.
8 or 9 months, yeah. So we were together for quite a bit, doing a little mini tour of In the Heights together, and it was.
I was on the sidelines, very jealous, just so everybody knows where I was at this time.
Brie and I were discussing this earlier, where we are very sort of ignorant of history when it comes to the Latinx community, which is interesting because Latinx history is our history. Latinx history is the diaspora. It is mixed history. It is Black history. We're all so intertwined, but yet are forced to sort of somehow categorize ourselves as separate and as different. I grew up believing that I was Black, Puerto Rican, and white, and how recently my Puerto Rican heritage has come into question due to my biological father's inability to tell the truth. But I still identify as Puerto Rican, and so this is a thing that is very near and dear to my heart. And so to start this out, I was wondering if you two ladies could tell us and the listeners how you identify and how that identity has carried you through your life and the experiences that you've had.
Well, I guess I'll start with pronouns. She, her, hers. I was born and raised, like I said before, it's one of the things that if you know me, it's like, what's the first thing you know about Alyssa? She's from the Bronx. So I know that where you grew up is not part of everybody's identity. But when you grow up in certain cities, for me, New York City, your borough, there's a lot of, that pride that comes in with your upbringing. So I always rep my borough proud and loud. I'm a Bronx girl. That is part of my identity. I am also Puerto Rican, which, of course, what does it mean to be Puerto Rican? That's like the question on the table as well, right? When we talk about the genetics of it, which is something that's been a hot topic of discussion for my family and I and my partner and I over the last few years, it's the realization that we're such an amalgamation. I know that there's French in there because of last names. I know that there's German in there. I know that there's African in there. I know that there's Spanish. My dad's side of the family is also like, he's half Spanish from Madrid. So all of that goes into the genetics, but what does it mean to be Boricua? Which we can even get into another discussion, which I'm sure Lillian will comment on as well, because people sometimes think that it's also there's a difference between being like a New Yorican, like a Puerto Rican who grows up in New York, or in the States, versus somebody who grows up on the island. But yeah, in terms of the way I was raised, I always just say I'm a New Yorican, I'm a Boricua. I am an 89 baby. So I feel like I'm part of the last generation of people who remembered what New York City was like when it wasn't Disney-fied Times Square.
Clean.
Yeah.
When it wasn't cleaned up, when it was still rough and tumble.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I feel like I keep having this conversation often with people about how growing up, we never said, it wasn't just like they're white and we're this. It was always like, oh yeah, that person's Italian, we go to their house for this meal. That person's Irish, we getting some this at their house. That person is Haitian, we getting this food at their house. Like, it was, everybody knew where they came from or knew their family history when I was growing up. So I feel like I kind of took a reverse journey, where as I started to get older and went to college and started to get involved in the arts industry, I started to then question my identity, or it was the first time people started to put other identities on me or define me for myself. So that's been a really weird journey to like grow up, I think, so confident in your personal identity and be full of pride about that. Don't get me wrong. New York City is very flawed. I am totally aware of that. But I'm just saying, in the time that I grew up and how and where I grew up, I think our families had all experienced some pretty traumatic stuff in the city, with the Bronx's burning and all kinds of stuff that was going down, so that by the time we came along, they wanted us to be proud of who we were. But yeah, it's identity is an interesting thing, especially in the arts. I've played many ethnicities and have fought very hard to just play myself. So I feel like, I don't know if I'm getting too deep right now, but yeah, sum it up. I identify as a New Yorican Bronx chick, here to love all my Black and brown sisters.
I am born and raised in Puerto Rico. And so Spanish was my first language. English is my second language. And my family moved to Utah when I was almost 12. So I was 11 still. That was really, it was hard because, Alyssa spoke about like that pride of being from where you are. I feel like that is a very Puerto Rican thing. I mean, like, it's a very American thing to be proud to be an American. I mean, right now, being proud to be an American kind of feels like throwing up in my mouth. But I've never not been proud to be a Puerto Rican and to be from Puerto Rico and to be like a Boricua. Boricua, for those of you who are wondering, the Taino peoples that were the first peoples on the island called Puerto Rico Boriquen, which is, I'm trying to remember now, I want to say it's home of the god, place of the god, or something like that. They felt that Puerto Rico was where their primary god lived, that on that mountain is where he lived.
It means land of the brave.
No, see? I was like, I'm not sure, but they did believe that that's where he lived. Anyway, so anybody who's from the island, anybody who is Puerto Rican, anybody who has grown up in that culture or embraced that culture is like, I'm a Boricua. And so you see somebody, I swear to God, I can't even tell you how many times I've seen a flag in somebody's car in Chicago and been like, Boricua, and they're like, hey, Did I say she, her, hers? I think I did. Anyway, but I feel like I never had any questions about who I was or what I was or where I was or where my heart sat until my family moved to Utah and I was surrounded by white people who were trying to decide whether I was worthy or whether I was worth their time. Or it was so intense, and Alyssa's heard me say this before, it was so intense and it was so hard to be accepted that you start assimilating. Get rid of that accent as soon as you can, bring that energy down, don't be as excited about things, straighten your hair, assimilate and hide. And so that was most of my teen years and probably well into my college years, because I stayed in Utah for college. But it wasn't, but in college was where I was like, wait a minute, fucking ridiculous. What makes me is how proud I am of who I am and all of the things in my culture, all the things that people get excited about me is when I am myself. And when I say this is something that is part of how I was raised. And this is so, I mean, it was a long journey back to myself. And it was a long journey, speaking of hair, it was a long journey back to loving my hair, and embracing the beautiful, beautiful naturalness of my tight curls. So that's a whole journey that actually took me even farther, almost to my late 20s. I find it hard now because people want to choose. Are you white? Are you black? And, something like the census where you have to fill out, oh, what are you? Okay. The first question, when your name, blah, 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 blah. You get to the page was like, what is your cultural background? I'm like, I'm Latina. And then it's like, what is your race? And it says white, black, and then it breaks down, but nowhere in there does it say, I was like, I'm Latina. Isn't that a race?
Yeah, I remember the first time I was looking for that too. I was like, they left the box off.
I feel like they missed us. And you have to choose white, you have to choose black, you have to choose. And I'm just like, I don't feel comfortable choosing white. I am very, very, very fair skinned. So I would, I guess, argue that I'm a white Latina person. But I am certainly not white in America. You know what I mean? Like that is not I am not seen as a white person in America. And what I love about being on here, and I don't know why this is not a thought that I had before now. So I'm sorry that it's not a thought that I had before now. Yesterday I was like, Puerto Ricans are a race of mixed people. I mean, that's what all Latina people are. To a certain degree, our mixes are different. Our percentages are different, which is how we end up looking a little different. If you're Puerto Rican, if you're Cuban, if you're Mexican, if you're, Brazilian, if you're, we are races of mixed people. So I feel there should be a maybe mixed option. Although I don't even know if that's like, I don't know.
Lillian, with so many things that you were saying, I was like, yes, yes, yes. And I remember as like teenager and like preteen, Jennifer Lopez was the it girl. And I remember feeling like I identified within the Latinx community because I saw her as mixed. I saw her as biracial. I saw her as somebody that like walked the line between being in a white environment and white passing, but somebody who also was still included in the Black community. She was still included with like those conversations. And so anytime anybody ever said, you look like you could be Dominican, or you look like you could be mixed with Puerto Rican, what are you? I would just be like, oh my God, thank you so much. Because this was like a community that was proud of who they were. And maybe, and I don't want to like assume that everybody who identifies as Latinx knows who they are, but there's pride behind that. And growing up, just being biracial, Black and white, I didn't have that. I didn't feel like I belonged in either of. So just seeing a community that was so proud of who they were and where they came from and everything about them, I was like, I want to be that. Let me try to present more like that so I can feel included into something, you know?
It's interesting that you bring J-Lo up, obviously, as for me, I'm like, hey, come on, Bronx. But it's like, that was part of the upbringing too. It's like, there was not really a difference. It was like, those are our Black sisters, like, and that's it. You know what I mean? Like, we're all one. So it's also, I don't know if we're going to talk about this, but it's an interesting time as well now, during the BLM movement, where there's, you know, at times there can be the divide where some people are like, no, you are not Black. And then some people are like, no, we are all Black. That's an interesting thing that I was actually even just talking with my partner as early as an hour ago, with like the conversations that people are having about that. Because growing up, it was, we're all Black. We are all one.
I certainly do not walk into a room of white people and feel like I am part of the community. I do walk into a room of Black people and go, hey fam, hey, you know, it just is what it is. And like, I was commenting to Emily, which I think is what inspired her to invite us on this podcast, that a friend of mine, so I did not have a Black Lives Matter t-shirt and I wanted one so bad. I had ordered one, but it was going to take a month to get there, and I had some protests that I was going to, so I wanted my Black Lives Matter shirt. And my friend was like, I have so many, I'm going to give you one. And she gave me one and I was so excited, and it says Black Lives Matter really big on it. And I was like, yes. But I didn't clock till I got home that on the lives, so Black Lives Matter, Black was in white, lives was all in white except for the I, which was red, and matter was red. So if you look at and you take away the white letters, it says I matter. I was like, can I put this shirt on? And my friend was like, yes, of course you can. You're one of us, you know? And I was like, yeah, but like, I don't want to upset my Black brothers and sisters by letting them think that I think that my experience has been the same as their experience, because that is certainly not true. This movement is for me, but also the focus of the movement right now is for that Black community to be lifted up, you know? And I was like, I don't know if I can wear this shirt. And I was so heartbroken, you know, because I was like, I just want to rap. But after talking to her and talking to Emily, and I was like, yes, you are allowed to wear this. And I was just like, okay. I just gotta let myself know that, you know, people's feelings are going to be people's feelings. But what I know is that my blood and my roots and my people are the same people. So I'm allowed to wear this shirt.
Emily and I have had multiple conversations about not necessarily feeling like we belong in this conversation when we do. Yes, we grew up in white environments, in white households, but we still experienced being Black because we were not a part of the white.
There's been a lot of talk in the past couple of years, specifically in the hip hop community, about like who has the right to claim hip hop. And just for a fun little history lesson, I would like to remind everybody that hip hop originated in New York from the Black and Latinx communities. I feel like a lot of the conversations recently in the community have been like, who's allowed to say certain things and who's allowed to perpetuate certain stereotypes, we should say. There's been a lot of like arguments about like Cardi B's acceptance in the hip hop community versus like, oh my God, I'm gonna forget her name.
Amara Del Negro.
Yes.
Listen, everyone has their opinions and issues with artists. Like, of course, I love Cardi B because, first of all, I don't doubt that that's her. I got cousins like her. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah. I used to manage a bar in the Bronx, and like I had all the girls from the strip club, and they had their families and they made their coin, and they used to have dinner together before going to work. And like, they were the best, you know? So I love that she keeps it real.
If I can be completely honest, I did not know that there were dark-skinned Latinx people. I mean, growing up in Minnesota, I saw what I saw on television, and it was just a lot of like Adrienne Bailon or Jennifer Lopez. And that was kind of it. And so I saw their curl pattern and I was like, okay, that's kind of similar to mine. But like I said, how I wanted to be a part of this community. And so I was leaning towards Jennifer Lopez. It's like, in hindsight, if I would have had the access to the resources that we have now, I could have found more people that look like me within my community and within the Latinx community, but I didn't know that. And it's not like our white supremacist society was like uplifting those women, those people to be able to be represented.
100%.
Emily made an interesting comment about like who established hip hop that I wanted to comment on, because I absolutely agree with you. Of course, growing up, it wasn't about like, did hip hop belong to Black or Latin people? It was, does it belong to your borough or my borough? There was never a question about the color of our skin and our place in the movement, the lifestyle, the music, you know? But then in terms of like, is it your borough? Is it my borough? That makes me think about colorism, you know? And I think we started all of this off by talking about who is this movement for and who is it not? And I think that there are two different things that we have to discuss when we talk about that question. And one of those things is colorism. It is one thing to unite as one and talk about the plight of many who are other. And then I think it's our jobs to separately be like, okay, now, like, listen, we ain't perfect, y'all. Let's talk about our issues. Let's talk about our colorism. Let's talk about this guilt, that guilt. You know what I mean? This pain, that pain.
Well, because we certainly perpetuate that within our own culture. You know, when I think about TV that I took in, you know, before I moved to Utah, and I think of like the telenovelas that I saw, I couldn't even begin to pinpoint one Afro Latinx person in my memory. And certainly it is something that we have to break down within ourselves. You know, it's not something that we can completely ignore. And that is something that is learned and built in. And I think Alyssa once said something that was like, when they started raping our ancestors to create us, it was like, oh, maybe my child will be a house slave, which is better than being the field slave that I am because they're lighter skinned. I mean, it was a learned thing for survival. And now it's like, I have to break that down, because that's not it anymore. When you said that to me, I was like, that is so true. I was like, I bet that is 100%, where these families were having children these women were having children that were lighter skinned and going, okay, maybe there's a level of protection in that. There's a level of survival in that.
That's something that Emily and I were talking about when we did our Sally Hemings story. And the idea, like when we talk about slavery, if we talk about slavery, because we don't talk about slavery that often, and people are so quick to say, well, get over it. And it's like, okay, but we're not normalizing what it was actually like. Okay. So when we're actually thinking about what it was like to be a slave, we have to think about survival skills, right? Like, because that's what it was. How are we going to make it through the next day? And so I think that's so ingrained in our society and within our communities that that's the way to have better success. And it's also because society is still treating us that way. And so what does that say about the community at large and our society at large, that we are minimizing these women and these people to erasure?
I have a theater related question. I've had a lot of conversations with other performers about a theater show that shall not be named, written by white people, about what they think it means to be Puerto Rican. I know how we feel about white people playing Latinx roles. They just shouldn't fucking do it. But how do you feel about biracial or mixed people who share the same lineage and genetics technically, but don't identify as Latinx? How do you feel about non-Latinx mixed people playing Latinx roles?
I think it's time for the show to, first and foremost, it's time for the show to be retired. It's
okay, period.
It's time. And don't get me wrong, this is coming from somebody who, listen, when I first saw the movie and I saw Rita Moreno, I said, I'm going to play that part. I'm going to fucking do that. I would be remiss to say, and truthful to say, that I haven't auditioned for the show, but I do think it's time. I think it's time to retire it. Now, on the idea of what the show is, it can be complicated, you know, because I see both sides. At the end of the day, it's not an accurate portrayal of Puerto Ricans, you know what I mean? Of course, there are things that are in there that you can find pride in terms of like being sassy, you know what I mean? And like standing up to your man, like, no, your man's not going to tell you, you're going to tell him. Of course, there are those ideas that are in there that are attractive, you know? But for me, I think I don't think I'd have trouble with somebody who is mixed race, playing other parts in the show, playing the sharks in the show. Depending on how they identified. If they're just using their genetics as an excuse to get a part and there's no connection and they're not doing the homework, then I need you off that stage. I need you to take it off your resume. I need you to decline that offer. But if there is something in you that does connect and that is part of your story, at the end of the day, who am I? I'm not in your body. I didn't experience your experience. You know what I mean? And I do think that this is part of your story as well, if you identify that way. I think there's a big difference between how you identify and then using your knowledge of your genetics to your advantage, which is exploiting a culture and a people. And I think that that's a very different thing.
I think the line for me is, if you're going to rep our culture, and be that person that is the face of that culture, then you better have, at very least, had some experience of that culture in your life growing up.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, it's like, I'm going to use Emily as an example. Emily was not raised in a Puerto Rican family, but she was raised believing she was Puerto Rican. So that, you know, like, whether that is questioned right now or not, to me, you're Boricua, because that's what you, from the second you were born, you were told you are white, Black, and Puerto Rican. And that was something that was inside of you, that is inside of you here and here. You know what I mean? So I have zero problems with Emily being in the show that requires her to be a Puerto Rican character, because I think she is. I have a problem with taking advantage of my culture to help you succeed in roles that do not belong to you.
I feel like if anybody is listening who is in the arts, or you have friends who are in the arts, know that what we're talking about, of course, there are gray areas, you know, like I think we all have worked with people who are mixed race, and who are maybe doing a show for the first time with a bunch of people of color, and they're honest about it. They're like, I want to connect with this part of myself. I don't know much about this part of myself. And they are immersed in it, and they say they reach out. That's also really beautiful and acceptable. You know what I mean? That's like, if you have the need and the want in your soul to connect with your culture, do it. And you get to be part of a show surrounded by a bunch of people of that culture. Talk to them, reach out, because chances are they're going to embrace you. You know what I mean? And I think that's really important. I mean, I was on the national tour of Motown, and I even during that, I mean, I had my reservations. I was like, is this specifically my story to tell? For context, I was a swing. I wound up playing every female. So I played a variety of different characters from white to Black. So there was also, again, in terms of the industry and what their visual standards are, a reason for why I had the role that I had. But I took the time as well, as connected as I already felt to Black culture. You know, I had to take the time as well to ask my Black sisters and be like, talk to me about this, teach me, you know, because yes, I know that my grandparents were there. My mom was part of this movement too, you know, but my connection is different. And I feel like communication, for those of y'all listening, if you got a friend thinking about doing a show and you are like, should you be doing the show? Talk to them. Have them listen to this podcast.
And I do want to say, my feelings are my feelings. They are not shared by absolutely every Latina artist.
I have a question for y'all. It's something I've noticed for myself during this time in particular, but have any of you found a need or a want to re-educate yourself? Even like in terms of the basics. I know Lillian brought up Borinquen earlier and the Tainos, but I had to not too long ago really go back and be like, what were the dates? When were our people decimated? Who was the actual perpetrator? Yeah, it's been really an really interesting educational time for me. And I think that's like it's becoming more and more powerful. I wonder if you guys, have you felt the need to reach out and re-educate and delve deeper into certain things you thought you knew? And if so, what did you find?
I was going to say, so on our Cafe Con Leche Instagram on Tuesdays, we do like a Travel Tuesday, Tasty Tuesday. And so I like post about food, but I try to do a brief history of a place, which has proven difficult. What I loved about it is, we started with Puerto Rico, then I did Mexico, then I did Ethiopia. It has been like a blessing because it's let me go back through the histories of those peoples. And I find myself excited to work each week on whatever country that I find, because I'm like, oh, I can go into this history about these people, when did it happen, how did it happen? And between that and so my friend Tony lives with us, and he's a white male identifying person, and he has gone in on educating himself in all things. I can't stress how proud I am of the work he has done to change his frame of thought, to recognize the racism that was in him, I can't put enough words into how proud I am of it. In turn, because I have him here, he gets so excited about the things that he's learning that he just will sit down and I'll just let him tell me. And it is wonderful because it means I don't have to read the books. He gives me all the important things. I know I should read the books, but honestly, he's just like, I read this and this and this and this about this and this. And it's been amazing too. He's also a really great orator. He's like very good at talking and expressing himself and explaining things. So I'm just like, this is great. I understand this better than if I'd have read it myself. So it's been wonderful to get that. It's been humbling to receive that information and that education. And as I'm prepping now to have my own kid, trying to think back on all the things that were in me, that were learned, that I can avoid with my own baby. So that has been a really amazing journey.
I have also been doing a lot of research because one of the things that we have been doing on this podcast is history lessons, and we've been starting with history that is related to being mixed and being bi or multiracial. And we did Sally Hemings, which I discovered because I knew of Sally, but I always assumed that she was an African slave, but she was actually 3/4 European. And we also did one on the tragic mulatto trope, which is something that I had learned about. And besides the things for the podcast, I recently purchased the book Stamped from the Beginning, and I think I have read the prologue and the first chapter, and I have dog-eared everything. I have put markers on everything, and just it already touches on slavery past the beginning of America. Like, I've always known slavery has existed since basically the dawn of time, but I hadn't fully realized that Africans have been enslaved by people who assumed that they were less than because of their connection to tribalism and the earth, and because of the darker pigment, since the Greeks and the Romans. I don't think I ever really understood that, like, Black people have been literally stamped in the beginning for no reason other than other groups of people have deemed them as less than.
It's an interesting phenomena that you almost equate being European or of European descent with enslaving indigenous peoples. Thinking about, like, there's again, the Taino, were the indigenous people of Puerto Rico. There is a Native American museum. If anybody's in New York and it has reopened and you can find a safe way to go, or when everything is safe, please go to the Native American Museum. It is all the way downtown by Battery Park, the very, very end of the island, one of the oldest parts of the city. And I do believe it is a free museum. I'm not sure how that has changed recently, but I implore you to go because they celebrate and educate on the indigenous peoples around the world, because they've all been in some crazy way enslaved and murdered, and it's just insanity. And it's insanity, especially thinking about indigenous peoples being like the closest to who we are as human beings in our core and our connection to the land, you know? that out of peace, and not saying every indigenous people was a peaceful one, but it's an interesting phenomena. So I implore you to go to the Native American Museum in New York City, because you will learn about indigenous peoples all over the country and all over the world and what they've been through.
Well, and it's interesting because, like, again, because of having to study the history of different places, Ethiopia had slavery happening into the 1940s. The 1940s, 1940. That's what I just said. So, you know, that is when, I think that's, if I remember correctly from what I was reading, that is what it like was officially like, here's the law that says this is not okay. It's so far beyond where we started and so far past where we ended, quote unquote.
Exactly. Learn about the tribes in Africa. Learn about all of them. You know what I mean? Like, and their values, their core. There is I'll have to look it up and quote it later, or send the information to you. But there is like a 23andMe that now traces your African roots specifically and tells you what tribes you are a descendant of. Yeah, I recently heard about it. Or is it African Genetic Diversity 20? Yeah, and I believe the company is also owned by an African-American woman. I will find that. And if you're a person of color, if you are African-American and you want to know more about where you come from, check that out.
And I love what you said, Alyssa, about I feel like there is a big push right now, just in general, just in the public, to educate yourself about other peoples. And that has to start, I think, at the indigenous, that like with indigenous cultures, that is our roots.
That's a great way to segue into one of the things that I love and I wanted to talk about when it comes to Puerto Rico and the people of Puerto Rico. Lillian mentioned it earlier about the census in PR and how when it comes to race, there's nothing really to check. And when I was doing research about it, I found that some people feel that nothing fully represents the vastness of their culture. The traditions of the culture in Puerto Rico are the traditions of the cultures that were either brought there or had been there in the first place. And I feel like that is so unique to Puerto Rico, right? Would either of you like to talk about the different intersections of culture there?
I can touch on it a little bit. I was going to say, just off of what you were saying, I looked this up because I this is a thing that I saw that I was like, that is 100%. But like, if you're looking at music specifically, let's talk about Latina music. Mambo comes from Black culture. Cumbia from Black culture. Salsa comes from Black culture. Bachata comes from Black culture. Merengue, reggaeton, bembao, punta, samba, baile funk, mumbatón, Latin trap, like all of that comes from that drum root. So there's that. And then when you look at our cuisine is a beautiful mixture of all of those things, because the spices and herbs and such that we use, those are very African. The rice that came to us through Spain. And then within the Taino culture, you get a lot of like root vegetables. You know, you're looking at something like pasteles. Pasteles are a thing where you take a root vegetable and you got to grind it up. And you, old school, those people would have ground it up on a stone, and that's Taino is, you know, like we grind that up on a stone. And it in this day and age, we're lucky and we have a guayo to like sit there doing on. But if you're not careful, you're going to take a chunk of your finger. But it's not pasteles if you didn't leave a piece of yourself in there. So like, you know, rite of passage. It's all right. Listen, run it in the sink, put a Band-Aid on it, get back to it. You got a job. So, you know, like pasteles, like those root vegetables, super Taino. Those spices, super African. That pork, Spain brought that pork here. That is about as like, that is a perfect little brick of who we are, little brick of food that represents us top to bottom. And like, do not get me wrong, we absolutely suffer deeply from colorism, which is interesting because we're so proud of what makes us up, and at the same time still lean into that colorism, which is unfortunate. Like, I'm like, how can you be that and proud of all these things that make up this beautiful, colorful, vibrant, delicious culture that just is in our hearts, in our blood, in our minds, and like, so it's a hard thing to consolidate. Maybe that's the word. Listen, English is my second language. I'm not ever sure what words are.
Just to wrap things up, I would love to know what either of you, speaking from your experience, what you would like people to know about your experience that people maybe don't know or maybe haven't understood before.
What a good question. Ooh. There are many answers to that question. I think one that keeps sticking with me recently, especially with what we're going through in the arts, and also being a woman who's trying to start a company of her own and take charge of my destiny and help with other BIPOC artists with their destiny by having equity in our own work, is I think that people, it's been ingrained in us culturally. And by people, I mean, I'm just going to talk about American people. It's been ingrained in us culturally through media, through the arts, to have our perceived notions of what people are like, what different cultures are like. We think about a Latina, a lot of people say J-Lo. There are certain images, certain colors, certain hair types that we associate with certain cultures. And that's part of the work that we all have to do, is to unlearn that stuff. I know Lillian talked about thinking about this because she's, gearing up to have a child. That's the next chapter of our lives, is bringing life into this world, and how are we going to set them up for success to build a greater world around them that can be more accepting, that can be more inclusive, that can celebrate these differences. And that work starts with us. I guess that's one thing. And then it's not enough to say, I support Black Lives Matter. It's not enough to say, I'm educating myself and I'm aware of X, Y, and Z, but then turn around and discriminate against a woman of color or discriminate against a female artist of color. You cannot say one and not support the other. If Black Lives Matter, then Black Lives Matter regardless of gender. Black trans lives matter. And that is something that has come up recently in experiences that I want people to be more aware of. You can be a homosexual man and be supportive of many things and still disrespect a woman of color. Be aware of that. Sorry, that wasn't just directly about Latinas and Latin culture, but those are my feelings right now.
I've been trying to think what to say. And I mean, the thing that I was going to say is something that's essentially piggybacking on what Alyssa was saying, which is we need to break down the ideas of thinking we know what a Latine, Latinx, Latina, Latino person looks like. I can't tell you, I spent most of my career not playing Latina persons, being denied those roles because I didn't quote unquote look Latina enough for them, and then once I started actually getting to play those roles, it changed the world for me in ways that I can't even begin to explain. And so I would ask your listener base to really take into consideration what you think, even if you're not even thinking of Latina people. What is it you think Chinese people look like? What is that image in your brain? And know that there are probably all different shades and sizes and hair types within all other cultures that are not your own. Don't erase us. And I include myself in this. Do not, don't get me wrong. This is not particularly having to do either with Latinx people, but give yourself the grace to fuck up. Forgive yourself for your past thoughts, for your current, present, incorrect thoughts, for any mistakes that are coming in the future, because the mistakes are going to come. You're human. And I know that's hard to do for ourselves, and it's hard to do for other people. But if we don't give other people a chance to grow and learn, how are we going to change things,
Thank you so much to Alyssa and Lillian for being on today's podcast. You can listen to Cafe Con Leche on Instagram at Cafe Con Leche ITH, on YouTube at Cafe Con Leche with Lys and Lil, and on your favorite podcast streaming services. For more information on Afro-Latinx and Latinx identifying culture, visit our website at mixedmessagespod.com.